Welcome to the Virgin River Gorge. So today we're going to walk through some of these beautiful Mojave Desert landscapes. Now throughout this I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the species that we encounter. This right here is a Puntia polycantha, also known as the plains prickly pear, and you saw there in the bottom is a desert marigold we'll talk about a little later. But with this video and videos like it, I'm hoping that you get the sense of being able to walk around and see some of the sagebrush, the mesquite, and some of these other plants that we are able to see. Again, there's some more of this Puntia species, and if we look here, that little white flower is a sago lily, Calochortus natalii, famous here in Utah. Actually, this is in Arizona. Technically, I'm just across, but they're found throughout Utah as well. And you can see some of the small strap-like leaves, and those have 3 petals like members of the lily family, Liliaceae. Again, we get a little bit closer here to another of the plains prickly pear. Pink flowers, those have lots of petals, lots of stamens. This kind of environment, it's perfect for these desert plants like this creosote bush, which you can see here is blooming. Again, we've got just some very, very beautiful little yellow flowers, 5 petals, multiple stamens. I'll be going into more detail on a lot of these plants when we dissect some of them. I don't want to get the videos to be even longer. So here we have the globe mallow, and there are 14 different species of globe mallow here in Utah, and this species, as well as the others, are typically orange or with light pink flowers, but morphologically they're fairly similar, and it's using the key is the best way to be able to get through that. Now, this soil here is really well adapted to a lot of these species because here there is a heavy sand and some large rocks, large aggregates, and this soil is excellent for drainage, which a lot of these plants thrive with, like the cacti, and but even these sagebrush and other plants out here are really well adapted to the heavy rains at a season. And so up here we've got something called desert marigold, and actually one of my favorite plants that you'll see out here. They're pretty widespread, and this plant right here has that sort of stereotypical desert coloration of the green-gray, and that is, depending on the species, it could come from, like if you see that cacti behind here, that's just from the spines and the waxy coating on the outside of the stems there, or also there can be hairs, and there are various ways where they get this coloration, but it's an adaptation to these extreme temperatures. But you can see that this marigold is in the Asteraceae family, or Compositae, and it's comprised, that head is comprised of, that capitulum is comprised of several small flowers. You're going to notice that I will be looking over and over and over again at these species of cacti. I just want you to see cacti flowers are pretty distinct. I'm fond of cacti, and so I probably spend an unnecessary amount of time on them. Speaking of cacti, this right here is a Cylindropuntia or a chala cactus. There are two or three really, but essentially there's two main types of these cylindrical cacti. They're related to Opuntia or prickly pear, and we'll get into more depth. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any of them blooming. I was a little bit early, but I'm still going to talk about some of the differences. See, we got more of this creosote, and as you can see, it's a pretty typical distribution. If you look across, you can see it's almost a pattern of, a type of chala cactus, some low plants, and that's sort of what is in this environment for as far as you can see, really. But what you'll notice is that seasonally you've got these small plants coming under. There's another monocot coming up here that we're going to look at, and there's that sago lily again, and I'm putting it in my shadow, so I probably should edit this part out, but I didn't. A lot of flowers on that one prickly pear species. You can see it's in clumps. Now, these do propagate via seed, but they also will, those pads or cladodes or pieces of stem will break off, and then an entire plant can grow from them. Because we got great timing with some of the cacti, but you'll see there's another site we go at, and there's 2 or 3 species of the cacti that did not, unfortunately, bloom. That is another member of the Asteraceae family, and we'll go over keying out Asteraceae, but it can become pretty difficult because the floral parts are so small when you pull apart that floral head. This is the plant I was talking about. This is desert hyacinth, and it is, if you'll notice, again in either 3s or 6s, it is a very beautiful little blue flower. That's a monocot. Like I said earlier, you can kind of see that what's blooming is pretty uniform. We're running into that desert marigold, creosote bush, Opuntia, with the occasional monocot that's blooming. One thing that you don't see is there's some of the mustards that are blooming, some of the sagebrush that you saw blooming earlier, and really a beautiful time here by the river, which is pretty empty. Now, this is another cacti species, and it's in a different genus, a kind of Cereus, and it's an Engelmann's hedgehog cactus. And there are hedgehog cactuses that form into clumps, and some that are taller columns like this. But one of the ways to know that it's a hedgehog cactus is you can see the flower is coming out below the top of the plant, and they also have that kind of purple lavender color. So they're pretty unique, and we were just catching those right at the end of their blooming. They're typically early, along with Opuntia polycantha. And yeah, I'm just going to look around a bit so you can see some of what else. In the bottom left, there's that ephedra that is just starting to bloom. So here's a hedgehog cactus that has finished blooming, and each of those flowers that are closed up will form seeds, small black seeds that will be dispersed by various birds and other small mammals. And there is a fruit that they produce, and it's edible. But there's a difference between edible and delicious. Well, like I said, I wanted to talk about these two species that are actually found next to each other often. This is buckhorn chala, and one interesting thing, it's called buckhorn because it looks kind of like antlers. And interesting thing about both of these is that if you were to fall into them, or if you touch them, or even if you brush on your clothes, you'll notice that pieces of that stem will break off, often, particularly the young growth at the top. And those can be traveled for a long distance on your own pants if you're not careful. And then they will set out roots and grow. And this silver chala will do the same thing. And in fact, if you look at that looks like it's just tailor-made to grab onto you, stick to your clothing, and get dispersed. This is just right off the road, actually, as well. And I'm going to turn to the road here in a minute, and you'll see that a lot of these mallows and other plants are just right off the road here. And some of this gets disturbed pretty often, and these species like that. And in fact, when water comes and rushes and moves the dirt around in the rainy season, that's part of why we have some of these plants that sort of grow between the more established bushes. Well, I've moved to a different location here, and this is very, very close to right at the border of Arizona and Utah. And this is mixed-use land that, as you can see, is used by cattle. And later on, you'll see I'm near a gravel pit. And so I'm up higher on some rocks. The soil is still sandy, but there's a lot of rock outcroppings. And there's some difference here, and some plants I'm pretty excited about. Notice I'm just off the road. Now, this is a paintbrush plant, and you'll see a few of these throughout. A member of Scrophulariaceae, very unique floral design. One of those will be being dissected, but notice this ferrocactus here growing up out of the rocks. Just looks like it's right out of the rocks. And cacti, there are a lot of cacti that are adapted to grow right out of rocky outcroppings. There's a spiny hedgehog cactus that's different than the one we'll see here that has a very, very beautiful red flower and grows in large clumps. And that particular cacti, you look for this sort of terrain, you go to where the rock clumps are, and eventually you'll find one out there in the West Desert. But you can see there's still creosote bush. There's still this prickly pear that we saw earlier at this same location. But again, the real star of this spot are some of the new cacti that we haven't seen. I accidentally disturbed this cow, and its mother is staring at me because this is actually a calf. And I realized this is me looking for the parent, and I didn't see it, but I left pretty quickly. Now, cattle and grazing, as well as the mineral use for some of these lands, which notice both are going on right at this location, that is something that is a problem for some of the endangered plants in the state of Utah. Now, I'm hoping to show you some of that mineral use and also some of that destruction, and to talk a little bit about concerned plants in a later video. I, as mentioned, am a big fan of cacti, and one of the things that I am passionate about is the conservation of some of the endangered species that we have in the state of Utah. Now, if you look down to your left, I think you might get a little glimpse as we zoom in on it, but this is what one of those ferrocacti look like as a young plant. But they can, this is a large specimen that's decades old, but this plant actually, they get larger than this, and they stand sort of solitary or with a younger cacti growing in their shadow. Unfortunately, I was about 2 weeks early, but you can see the remnant there, that small piece of black for the floral parts there. But a lot of this hedgehog cactus here with that same beautiful cup and my shadow in the way. But I believe it may not be here, but there's a point at which I get a very perfect shot down inside one of these. And I don't know if I'm going to be going over the dissection of a member of Cactaceae, because it's pretty apparent that it's a cactus when you look at it, both by how unique the flowers are and by the morphology of those modified stems and leaves in the spines and etc. So something that I'm about to start talking about is the human element to cacti conservation. Now, individuals like us, we can obviously do a lot to conserve these plants by watching where we step and watching what we do. Now, this Ferrocactus cylindricus, this Ferrocactus is not endangered, but do you see this pot here? I came across this pot, and unfortunately I knew that it meant I'd find some pretty interesting plants. I just didn't know where the human was at the time. But this plant here, and I don't blame him, he's found a beautiful double-barreled specimen of this small fish cactus. Now, Sclerocactus parviflorus is not an endangered species. However, there are many Sclerocactus. There are multiple Sclerocactus in the state of Utah that are endangered, and this is kind of interesting because they don't typically have this pale green flower, but they can. But Sclerocactus are known for having the flowers right at the top of the plant here. But I saw that pot and another pot a little bit later, and I started looking around for the human, and sure enough, I saw someone who had, when I got out of the car, they scooted away. Oh, there's another Ferrocactus little guy there. But they scooted away. I got some footage of them, and I recorded them and I'm including in this video to shame them for being a cactus poacher. I don't like cactus poachers. I don't think we should be digging up and taking the plants. I think that even as we do our plant collections and as we gather material to report with, I think it's important that we are conservation minded as much as possible. Look at this. This is a very beautiful hedgehog cactus. I just was excited, so I kept recording them. But anyways, I think something to note here is all of these foxtails were just stuck in my socks. More of the sago lily and the creosote bush. I noticed that there was, even just coming up the mountain, up the canyon a little bit, there was less blooming here. There was less creosote here blooming. None of the sagebrush was blooming. We were on the front end of the blooming of the opuntia, and I thought that was really interesting that we were already just in that far. You can see there's that desert marigold, and those are less open, and there's fewer blooms. But so it's amazing what a little bit of elevation, a little bit of change can make. That was one of the challenges of being in Washington County, was trying to follow the flowers and follow the blooms. And Actually, one of the better spots I found in Washington County here in a little bit is just behind my hotel room. And I found that it was very fruitful to just climb up into the hills there, and that spot faced the sun and got a lot of sun, a lot of heat. So you can see here that it's on these rocky outcroppings, like I mentioned, where we have some of these clumps of cacti that they like to grow because of the minerals there, and also some of how there's a water holding capacity that's associated with those areas around the rocks. So you can kind of see some of the gravel operation back there. And yeah, there's all of those stamens though that are kind of there you go. And that's a great example of a typical cactus flower right there. All right, here's our cactus poacher. You can see him out there by those ferrocactus towards the edge of the road. He's not naked, although he was just wearing some shorts and stomping around out there. When I confronted him, I asked him about the pot, and he made a drug joke and then sort of shrugged off my line of questioning. So this is an example of that sago lily in more of a pink blush. They can be white, they can be pink, and there's also, it's kind of hard to see there. Anyways, there's some of the gravel being mined out there. There it is. All right, we're actually at a new location in St. George, and this is a joint fir or Mormon tea, Ephedra navidensis, and there's a green ephedra, and that's a different ephedra, and it's bright green as opposed to this gray, and there's a few other differences. But one of the things that I was happy I was in season for is a plant that's pretty specific to Washington County and St. George, and it's this beautiful guy right here, and this is in Papaveracea, and its name is the dwarf bear poppy, and I absolutely love these, and they are a threatened species, and they exist only in this area, and the quickly expanding developments that are in southern Utah, as well as mining and other types of land use, are threatened to destroy these. And I identify this a little bit later in a different place, but just wanted to show you that this is a protected desert area, and it's right by a subdivision. So I'm going to zoom out here in a minute and we can see that. All right, more bear poppies behind my hotel. I actually ended up finding a lot of really exciting plants just right up here. And the really cool thing about this is that other than these poppies, I really couldn't see them until I got right up close up on the mountain. And so I'm hiking here, and I obviously wanted to come and look at these beautiful poppies. But after a while, I started to notice that there were other fantastic plants in the area. So let's walk along this path and go find some of them. So there's some more of that bear poppy, but we can see as we come over here into this small little area, this little ravine, looks like there's something pretty interesting up here. It's actually one of my favorite desert plants that we'll encounter, and it's a member of the mustard family. We're just catching it as it's starting to bloom. You can see not all of the flowers are open on that inflorescence. We'll get a closer look here. So this is Princess Plume, Stanleya, and each of those individual flowers is still a pretty typical looking mustard, and it's that yellow color. But these are really exciting and really impressive to come across. Just looking here in the wild, one of my favorites. Notice those protruding stamens. But admittedly, this plant is one of those that is, once you've seen a few of them, you'll begin to recognize, at least down to the genus, what it is and what it probably is. And really that's a big part of the purpose of this class, is to get you familiar with the characteristics of these major plant families so that you can identify them. As you can see, I'm just at the edge of town. This is the south edge of town, and just approaching what a photographer would call the golden hour. But yeah, I end up finding a few more interesting plants. But isn't it just beautiful out here? You can see that there's more of those Princess Plume, the Stanleyas there, and some creosote. So still seeing a lot of those similar plants. They are found really throughout the Southwest.
Is this natural? Looks like it. Sure? I'm coming up. That is Formica, and it is natural.
It's hard not to be interested in finding different rocks and minerals as you come here, but that's a part of part of the whole experience. So this right here is a favorite of mine to come across, and a pretty common Adonis blazing star. And I think that I actually take footage of and encounter a few of them. So again, we've got protruding stamens. This is something that this genus, as you get to key more of them, you'll find that there's a lot of pretty recognizable characteristics. Those large number of stamens that are protruding, and the just general morphology of that flower. Again, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail as I go through these, because it would drag on, I think. And I just want to expose you to these landscapes and give you a feel of being in these places and encountering and picking up and looking at some of these plants. And feel free to pause any of these. I recommend that you do so, and that you look closely at the features and you see a video representation of some of the still pictures that we'll post in some of our other videos. Now, these were all over here, and this is in Boraginaceae or Hydrophiliaceae, and this is scorpion weed, and this genus is throughout the state, and this particular plant is typically a darker color than this. This was a beautiful lavender and white, and the very exaggerated stamens are a typical part of this, and the cluster of flowers that appear kind of curved together in that way is also characteristic. Now, my fingers smelled very strongly of this plant after this. They have a very distinct, and some might say very unpleasant odor that persisted with me for a long time. And I unfortunately did not key this out, and Dr. Harris probably knows what it is, but I don't, and didn't want to make a wild guess because I didn't key it out while I was there. So here's an example of a yucca, and this is very likely an ornamentally planted yucca that's not native. However, the typical characteristics of a yucca are here. Obviously, those leaves that are succulent, but these flowers, this tall inflorescence with these delicate white petals like this, and actually those are edible, and the seeds that are produced are a small black seed, and they were ground and made into flour, and the actual plant materials of the yucca were used for clothing fibers and for other things. They're a very useful plant, very beautiful plant, and those Joshua trees that we looked at earlier are one of the several examples of this genus here. So here's this other Adonis blazing star during the photographer's blue hour, just after the sun has gone down. So it's a little bit dark, but I was just on my way back and saw this just growing in the middle of a field. So this is off the road on the way up to Snow Canyon. And here we have a very, very stereotypical example of a mustard. It wasn't Sahara mustard, or it would have pulled it out. That's a invasive species, but I didn't identify it beyond that. You'll find lots of this. The old family name is Cruciferae, and if you notice, those 4 yellow petals make a cross. And that will be one of the giveaways for this family. Brassicaceae. Now, again, the semi-disturbed right off the road, you've got mustards, you've got those mallows, Up here we'll be able to look at more of this desert marigold. Again, just one of my favorites, that adaptation with that silvery green leaf structure and then these just beautiful composite heads. So down here in this low spot here that gets a little bit more water, there's a lot of these foxtails, and this appears to be some flowering plants. Now that behind it, those are some agave, but this is actually desert rhubarb. And when you get closer, you can realize that those are not flowers, those are their seeds. And it's interesting. I find them to be very beautiful in this state when they have grown and produced these seeds. Now this dock, as it's sometimes called, also has, or was very important for dyes. But here you can hear the sound. See closely that these are just seeds. So there's some more of that beautiful little yellow flower that I didn't identify, but this purple flower is something I do want to point out. This is called erodium, and if you'll notice, there's that long pointy seed structure, and it's called the storkbill. Notice there's a rock outcropping with some opuntia there, and as I pan right, eventually you'll see a yucca with a seed pod coming out of it. And again, those flowers have been converted into seed pods, and those would have been used to be ground into bread. Okay. The last location I came across, just this northern tip of Washington County, past Snow Canyon and past the National Forest. This is actually the Mountain Meadows site that I stopped at, and I found a couple of more species to look at. And this is an astragalus vetch, member of Fabaceae, the pea family, and it has very stereotypical of the one of the two types of pea flowers. And there'll be a in-depth talking about the banner and keel, but this is the Utah astragalus, or the Utah milk vetch, and they have everything from this light purple to almost a blue color flower, and they're pretty widespread. If you look on the cover of the Flora of Utah, you'll see an astragalus species. They're very widespread. And finally, we found another paintbrush here. Just showing you that we found paintbrush in Arizona, down in the Virgin River, and it's found at this elevation. I've seen it in the West Desert just this week. And that is the end of this field trip. I had a great time, and I hope you did too.